This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and I'm with my wife, Dania Michael. And this evening, we'd like to take some time to get into a discussion that I think will be very helpful. But at the same time, I think that it may be a discussion that turns into 10 discussions because there's just so much content, so much information that we can get into. And our goal in this talk tonight is just to walk through all of the content one time through, just to move through it and sort of get an overview of the content of this discussion, and then in future talks to go into these points in more detail. And once we get into the discussion, you'll see just how much content there is for us to unpack and talk about. And it's going to be plenty of content. I'd also like to say that this talk is intended only for those who are members on the Catholic Classicist site. So because it's a private group and it's members only, we're going to get into practical things a little more than we normally would. So if you've got any practical, detailed questions about the topics we discuss and get into, feel free to post them as comments, and remember that this is a closed discussion among members only, so we can relax a little bit and take it for granted that everyone involved in the conversation is sincerely interested in the Catholic faith and trying to practice these things in their own lives. So the topic that we're going to get into, the title of the talk will be The Duties of Catholic Parents, the duties of Catholic parents. And what I've done is I have a document in which I have typed out a total of 27 duties that are present in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And where this came from was a while back, maybe a year ago, I did a talk where I wanted to talk about the duties of parents, and I simply read through the relevant paragraphs in the Catechism. And as I was going through it, I said to myself, it'd be really helpful to draw these duties out and make a list that parents can keep in front of them to evaluate themselves with. And so I worked to type out those duties, and it came out to a list of 27 duties for Catholic parents. And so that's what we're going to do in these talks. We're going to walk through all 27 of them in this first talk just to sort of overview the topic, and then we'll get into the individual duties in more detail in future talks. If you're interested in knowing where these duties come from in the Catechism, it's paragraphs 2221 to 2231. 2221 to 2231, that's where the Catechism teaches on the commandment, honor thy parents. There's a number of paragraphs in there that deal with the duties of parents, and I've simply distilled these 27 duties out of those paragraphs to make a helpful list, and we're just going to go through that list in this talk, like I said, as an overview, to sort of introduce everyone to the 27 duties, and then in future talks to go into them in greater detail and sort of let the discussions go where they need to go based on what everyone would like to talk about. So we're just going to read through them in this talk and discuss them a little bit, and then dive into them more deeply in future talks. So let's get started. The first duty, the first of the 27 duties, is parents are to regard their children as children of God and respect them as human persons. Parents are to regard their children as children of God and respect them as human persons. Daniel, why don't you talk about what you were just sharing with me a few minutes ago about that first duty?
Well, just reading that over makes me, as a mom, kind of puts my children a little distant from me. They're not necessarily not my children, they're children of God. So I feel like it kind of separates me a little bit from them. And as a new parent, when you first come home with that baby is yours. You're in charge of every minute of the baby's day, and you're in charge of the schedule, how the baby eats, and everything. And as the children grow, you're still in charge of everything. So you tend to think of them as your children easily, and kind of lose this day to day thinking of them as children of God. And I feel like this kind of, just reading that at the beginning, I feel like, whoa, that kind of puts like a little bit of a wall between me and my kids. They're not my kids, they're God's children.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see that that's actually where the Catechism helps us to understand what our duties actually are, what this work of parenting actually is, and what it's not. Because we're always tempted to go down a path that really isn't our job as parents, and it sort of causes our lives to unravel, and all kinds of trouble develops when we try to do too much, when we try to go beyond what the duty of parents actually is. And we have to remind ourselves, and I remind parents of this all the time, God is also involved in the life of this child. This is not your child to save.
Mm-hmm.
This is a child of God, and God is going to be involved in this child's life. You have a role to play, and your job is to stay in your lane and play your role, fulfill your duty, do your job, and realize that there's other parts of the child's life that only God can take care, and God is going to take care of those things throughout the child's life. So yeah, that first duty, parents are to regard their children as children of God and respect them as human persons. Our relationship with them is temporary.
I feel like we could meditate on that for hours, just thinking about that, and kind of separating ourselves from our kids a little bit, you know what I mean? Because they're not everything is on us. These are God's children.
Right.
So both it kind of feels like the separation, but it also kind of feels like, wow, I can't be anxious or worried. These are children of God.
Right.
He cares about them. He cares about them.
Yeah, I think the separation, it also frees us from anxiety.
That's what I feel.
And all the pressure, which causes us to do all kinds of stupid things.
Right.
Where we have to realize that we have a duty to do, and that's it. We have to make sure that we fulfill that duty. We're not responsible for the salvation of children's souls, which is impossible. So, all right, so first duty, parents are to regard their children as children of God and respect them as human persons. And like you said, you can see how we can devote whole talks to these individual duties. So tonight we're just going to try to survey the list and prepare for future talks. So let's go on to the second. Parents are to educate their children that they, the parents, may fulfill God's law. Parents are to educate their children that they, the parents, may fulfill God's law. And so what I see there is we're to understand that our duty as parents, this is our business. This is not between us and our children. This is between us and God. This is our duty, God's commandments to us. This is about me saving my own soul by being obedient and fulfilling my duty to God. And the children are involved in that, but ultimately this is between me and God. That's what this is really about.
I think we lose that focus day to day.
It's not about the child's reaction, the child's response, the child's own free decisions. It's not about the child's choices. This is between me and God, my duty as a parent. So parents are to educate their children that they, the parents, may fulfill God's law.
Kind of switches everything around from how normally gets thought about.
And I think it puts us in the right mindset and allows us to understand how things are to be done.
Right.
Okay?
A lot of times we tend to tell the children fulfill God's law, and remind them. But no, you fulfill God's law. It's kind of putting the onus back on us,
just to do our duty.
Right, to do our duty
as a matter of obedience for God's sake. Okay? So that's the second duty. Parents are to educate their children that they, the parents, may fulfill God's law. Duty number 3, parents are to create a home where tenderness, forgiveness, respect, fidelity, and disinterested service are the rule. Parents are to create a home where tenderness, forgiveness, respect, fidelity, and disinterested service are the rule of the home. So when I read that, what I think about is just how, there's a lot packed into that duty that sort of blows up most people's expectations about what family life is going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be forgiveness because there's going to be sin in the family. And the Christian family isn't ruined by sin. It's ruined by not handling sin when it does come up, by not handling it in the right way. These are also things that are in our control. We can create a home where tenderness is the rule. And I think this largely is where the role of a mother becomes important, because the father, especially when you think about the division of labor in the family, and you think dad takes upon himself the burden of earning the living. He deals with the world. He deals with the pressures of the world. He deals with those things and leaves mom, to a degree, free from those pressures. And she's free to be tender, to be patient, to be gentle. Whereas, dad usually has a lot bottled up because of the stress of work, like Mr. Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. He's in the office. He's carrying around those thoughts and pressures day by day. By keeping mom free from that, she can be the heart of a home where tenderness, forgiveness, and these virtues are present. And I think God sort of designs that into the family life. And then the other virtues listed are respect, fidelity, and disinterested service. Learning to serve others, learning to understand that you're part of a family. You're not just your own selfishly ambitious monster trying to do your own will at everyone else's expense. But the question is, not what the family does for you, but what you can do for the family, right? Those are the ideas. Anything you'd like to say about that third duty?
No, I just feel like as the children get older, this comes more and more into play, especially as they kind of reach their teen years and adult years. There's so many times where they do things that are wrong to each other. They treat each other badly, and just to constantly model and teach them and remind them to be forgiving to each other and respectful to each other. This is something that comes into play every single day.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that down further in other duties. So let's keep going here. So that's duty number 3. Parents are to create a home. And again, notice it's not parents are to create children who. That's not in our control. It's parents are to create a home. This is in our control.
Okay, gotcha.
Where tenderness, forgiveness, respect, fidelity, and disinterested service are the rule. Duty number 4. Parents are to educate their children in the virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Parents are to educate their children in the virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. My first concern as a teacher is when I look at that duty, I just ask myself, how many parents can actually name the 4 virtues? How many of us are actually conscious of the 4 virtues that we're supposed to be teaching? And notice it doesn't say faith, hope, and charity, because those are a different kind of virtue. These are natural virtues. These are the classical virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And I think, again, as a teacher talking, my first concern is, do we even know the names of the virtues that we're supposed to be teaching our children? And secondly, could we define each of those 4 virtues? Do we actually understand what these virtues are? And when you see these things and you realize, no, I don't think I could define those 4 virtues, well then maybe this is why we're not doing too well in parenting, because we really don't even have the objective knowledge that we need to do our job, to know what to focus on. You know, what virtues am I really focusing on with the children? There's four virtues that I really want to focus on. I want to focus on prudence. What is prudence? I want to focus on justice, teaching my children what justice is. What is justice? Fortitude. What is fortitude? And temperance. What is temperance? So you can see that we're going to need to not only be able to name those virtues, but also define them and really understand what they are so that we can teach them. And then think about how to teach them. Where in our family life do we teach these things? Where and how do we teach prudence? Where and how do we teach justice, fortitude, temperance, and so on? And again, we could talk about those things for an hour individually, but parents are to educate their children in the virtues, prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. It's the fourth of the duties of parents. Number 5, parents are to apprentice their children in self-denial, sound judgment, and self-mastery. Parents are to apprentice their children in self-denial, sound judgment, and self-mastery. And now you see in that duty there, we see the what in the fourth duty, and now we start to see a little bit of the how in duty number 5. And this again ties back to number 2. Parents are to educate their children that they, the parents, may fulfill God's law. Now in rule 5 or duty 5, we see parents are to apprentice their children in self-denial, sound judgment, and self-mastery. Anything you want to say about that one?
Well, you just see that it's not us telling them with our mouth, but it's actually modeling them, like the fable of the mama crab and the baby crab. It's actually us doing it, modeling it, living alongside of them and showing them what to do. So it puts a lot of onus on us.
And we have to think about what an apprentice even is. You know,
Yeah,
what is an apprentice?
The apprentice is someone who's with the master.
Yeah,
right?
The master who runs the business and does this every day as a master, and the apprentice is just put with the master to learn bit by bit what the master does, from sweeping the floor and cleaning the tools all the way up to producing the works. You know, that's an apprenticeship. It starts by just watching the master.
Right. So it's really assuming that us as parents are doing number 4. We ourselves are practicing the virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, and then can, alongside of that, teach our
Well, yeah, and this is what I really want. This is what I stress when I talk to parents, is that the duties of parents really doesn't have anything to do directly with children. A lot of this is just mind your own business. Because if you're living your own life, you'll be able to do these things. If you're not living your own Christian life, you're not even going to be able to do these things. And it doesn't matter how much time you spend yelling at your children, chasing your children around the house. That's not how it works. None of the duties say, make your children this, make your children do this.
That's not in your control.
That's not in your control. And it's not the duty of parents. And that's why I think this is so important, is because it shows us that our actual responsibility is in our control. We can go to bed at night knowing that we're doing our duty. Whereas what most people think of when it comes to parenting, they think that causing the effect in their children is the duty of parenting, and that's impossible. And they just torment themselves with that. And we all experience that. We all want to cause the effect, but it's not possible. And that actually causes us to make mistakes and mess things up, and things begin to unravel. So parents are to apprentice their children. It gives us a good illustration to keep in mind. Parents are to apprentice their children in self-denial, sound judgment, and self-mastery. So it also gives us 3 things. We're supposed to be masters of self-denial. And we see that as parents, right? Dad makes a paycheck and hands it over to his family. That's self-denial. He models self-denial. Mom goes about her day in the family and sacrifices constantly for everyone else. She models that self-denial. The children grow up watching that. They grow up watching a father deny himself, a mother deny himself, and they learn from the masters what self-denial looks like. Sound judgment, making good decisions, talking through things, solving problems together, showing the kids how to deliberate when there's difficult questions to answer, difficult problems to deal with, showing them how to do that, and then self-mastery, knowing what to do, and even sometimes when it's painful to do it, mastering ourselves and doing what's right. So it's denying ourselves, making the right judgment, and then through self-control, actually doing what that sound judgment tells us to do. So apprenticing the faith, apprenticing our children in self-denial, sound judgment, and self-mastery. Okay? Duty number 6. Parents are to teach their children to subordinate the material and instinctual dimensions to interior and spiritual ones. Parents are to teach their children to subordinate the material and instinctual dimensions to interior and spiritual ones. So obviously here we have topics that we have to understand. What is this even talking about? What are material and instinctual dimensions? What are, material and instinctual dimensions? And then what are interior and spiritual dimensions? And what this duty is about, we're born into the world and we're like unreasoning animals. You think about it, we say that our children come to the age of reason when they're like 8 years old. They're not even reasonable. They're like animals. It's like having pets. They're not rational. They don't live according to reason. And it's a challenge through our whole life to subordinate the desires of our senses and our instincts, natural animal instincts. These are given to us by God and they're good. Desire to eat delicious foods, sexual desire, desire for physical comfort, desire to avoid pain. These are all just natural instincts. These are desires that are in us that are good. God put them in us because they're good, the same desires that animals have. But the difference in us is that these natural instincts and material desires, these physical desires, they're to be governed by faith and reason. And so man is unlike the animals in that man has these instincts and desires, but he doesn't act. He doesn't just act them out and carry them out. He actually subjects them to his own faith and reason. And so this duty here is to teach our children that as human beings, it's their duty to subordinate their material and instinctual desires or lusts, whatever, to subordinate them to interior and spiritual dimensions of their character. They have to control themselves. And we see just simple things like kids will eat candy until they rot the teeth out of their mouth. That's not reasonable. And so we have to teach them that you can't just do whatever you want to do. You can't just do whatever feels good. You can't seek whatever you desire. Just because it feels good doesn't mean you can do it. You have to learn to control yourself. And so it goes back to this apprenticeship in training them in self-denial, in self-mastery, and so on. So parents are to teach their children to subordinate material or physical and instinctual, natural dimensions to interior and spiritual ones. Okay, we're to help them become reasoning animals, which is what they're created to be. So that's duty number 6. Number 7, Parents are to give good example to their children. Parents are to give good example to their children. What that always makes me think of is when Jesus drew disciples to himself, how did he invite them to become Christians? He said, "Come follow me."
Mm-hmm.
All the disciples knew that being a Christian just meant living like Jesus, because Jesus set the example of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything he taught, he did. He was the example.
Mm-hmm.
And his message to his followers was just, come and do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Come follow me. So, duty number 7, parents are to give good example to their children. And again, notice that the duty of parents has nothing to do with the children.
Mm-hmm.
It's us giving good example,
Mm-hmm.
us living our life obedient to God's commandments. Number 8, parents are to acknowledge their own failings to their children. Parents are to acknowledge their own failings to their children. So again, there's no talk of perfection.
Mm-hmm.
There's no talk of perfection. And, we often look at our children's faults and we say, oh, I should have, as if we were perfect, then our children would be better. But
Mm-hmm.
the duties of parents don't require us to be perfect. What does it require of us?
To acknowledge our failings and admit them.
Yeah, so how do we do that? Why don't you talk about that a bit?
Well, I mean, how many times have we done things during the day just out of pressure or getting angry, and then realizing after the kids go to bed, I regret how I acted. I regret that I did that, and then going into them at night into their bedroom and saying, Jonathan, hey, wake up. I'm sorry I did that, and that was wrong of me to do that. A lot of times it takes for them to go to bed to actually think through the day and realize, like, I was wrong in that,
Mm-hmm.
and then go confess it to them later on. I can think of tons of times we've done things
Yeah,
like
and
that.
see how that ties back to number 3. Parents are to create a home where tenderness, forgiveness are the rule.
Mm-hmm.
And how do they do that? Number 7, parents are to give good example to their children.
Mm-hmm.
Number 8, parents are to acknowledge their own failings to their children. That it should be comfortable. Our kids should know how to confess their sins.
Mm-hmm.
Our kids have to be shown how to apologize to someone, how to say, I'm sorry, how to ask for forgiveness. And what I've noticed in the children is that when I've done this to the children, when I've gone and acknowledged that I did something bad, that's one of the happiest moments of the kids' lives.
Mm-hmm.
You just sort of see them light up because they know, the children know how hard it is to do that.
Yeah.
And to have a parent come and ask them for forgiveness, they get a taste of humility.
Right.
And it shows them,
Mm-hmm.
how to do it. It's an apprenticeship. We're showing them how to confess your sin, how to ask for forgiveness, how to be reconciled to somebody. And you can start to see how all these duties tie together. So let's keep rolling here. So parents are to acknowledge their own failings to their children. Number 9, parents are to guide and correct their children. Now, here's really the first duty where we're starting to get to the children. Parents are to guide and correct their children. It doesn't just say correct, it says to guide and correct. And one of the biggest problems that parents always have is it's very easy to say no, no, no. It's easy to say you can't do this, you can't do this. It's easy to punish, but that's not what this says. It says to guide. That means to actually provide positive instruction to them, what they should do, to guide them, to give them positive instruction, and then to correct them. Not to just punish them when they're bad, but to actually direct them to what they should do.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that's the challenge. It's very easy to punish kids. It's very easy to just lock everything down, and we're going to see later on why that's not parenting. But to guide them positively and correct them means to actually set them straight,
Mm-hmm.
point them in the right direction, and explain to them what to do. And again, what's the best way to do that? By example. right?
Yeah.
So, duty number 9, parents are to guide and correct their children.
We're not just testing them, but we're actually leading them and showing them what to do beforehand, you know?
Yeah, not just judging them all the
Yeah,
time.
it's
We're not
easy
just
to do that.
yeah,
It's
we're
easy
not
to-
we're not the executioner stalking them 24 hours a day.
Right.
It's our job to actually lead them like a shepherd and show them what they're supposed to be doing. And also provide them with the stuff to do that they're supposed to be doing,
Right.
you know? So guide and correct their children. Number 10, parents are to discipline their children. Parents are to discipline. And of course, when we think about this, everyone's going to think about spanking or punishing or sending kids to their room or you're grounded but that's really not what discipline is. You just think about what is self-discipline. Self-discipline is simply establishing routines and habits that are good and right. And so discipline, when it says parents are to discipline their children, this isn't about, again, it's tied to number 9. This isn't about just catching your kids every time they make a mistake and punishing them. That's not what discipline is, in training them positively to do what they're supposed to do. And there are a million ways we do that. We control what they eat. We control the schedule. We control their activities. We control how the house is set up. We control social activities. The parents control all these things. And if parents are living responsible, devout lives, there's going to be discipline in the family. And we both know, we can say that in our family, our children have been raised in a disciplined house because we've had work to do, lots of work to do. We've had a tight schedule. We've had, prayer regularly. We've had a busy life, and our children just growing up in that environment have been disciplined just because of the discipline of the family life.
Right.
So duty number 10 was that parents are to discipline their children, but the emphasis here is that this doesn't mean spanking necessarily. It's much broader than that, because our entire family life can discipline our children.
Right.
Okay? So number 11, parents are to bring their children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Parents are to bring their children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And what that's referring to, St. Paul teaches that. And what's good about this duty is it helps us to see that we don't just make up our own rules. We don't create our own culture, decide to do whatever we. Again, this goes back to number 1. Parents are to regard their children as children of God and respect them as human persons. The order of our house, the rules of our house, the focus of our life is supposed to be on God's will.
Well, you see, the parents have to study then. We have to study to know what the discipline and instruction of the Lord is, because we have to be under it ourselves and be living it ourselves in order to bring our children up in it. So this is not a lazy thing, like you're just going to randomly yell at the kids. We have to be wise and know what this means.
Yeah, and it's not just doing what our society does.
No.
It's not just putting your kids on the conveyor belt and then thinking that being strict is what it means to be disciplined. We're raising them in a certain discipline, not just with any discipline.
No.
We're not raising Olympic athletes. We're not raising professional violinists. We're raising our children within a certain system of beliefs and morals. And the discipline that we're supposed to be raising our children in is the discipline and instruction of the Lord, not just our own will.
So obviously we're going to be studying the scriptures, and we're going to be studying the Catechism to know what the church teaches for us to do. And so we have to be learning and being strict with ourselves so that we
and tie that into all the other duties we've read. Setting a good example, apprenticing the children in these things, educating them in the virtues, creating a home where these things are present. You just see how that it's teaching us a whole life as parents, a whole way of living where the children simply receive all the benefits of this life. If we're living the life that we're supposed to be living, the children live in this paradise of Christian apprenticeship. They have their parents showing them what to do. They have their parents sacrificing their lives for them. They have their parents teaching them, modeling for them, apprenticing them, providing for them. The children live in the presence of all these benefits, and the parents are constantly studying and learning to know what to do with motivation because their own salvation is promised to them.
Right.
And with the example of God Himself as the model parent, as the model father for us to imitate. So it's not just raising kids to be successful or raising kids to be the best kids in the neighborhood. That's all just relativistic. It's to raise kids, to raise children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. There's an objective measure. It isn't just subjective, whatever you like, whatever he likes, their family likes this, our family. There is such a thing as the discipline and instruction of the Lord. It's an absolute objective goal for that discipline. Okay, so that's duty number 11. Parents are to bring their children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Number 12, parents are to initiate their children into solidarity and communal responsibilities. Parents are to initiate their children into solidarity and communal responsibilities. And I can think of a good way we do this because of the church, and it's got to do with confirmation preparation.
Okay.
You know,
So
why don't you talk about that a little bit?
So you're talking about with service work?
Yeah, just think about what confirmation prep requires and look at that duty. We're to initiate our children into solidarity and communal responsibilities. I mean, just think about confirmation prep in our parish and what the kids have to do. Why don't you talk about that a bit?
Well, I used to. It's different now with COVID stuff. But they used to have to do for confirmation 5 hours of service work in the community, 5 hours of service work at church, and then 5 hours of service work in the family. And so they had to be involved in community and get to know other people and represent the parish at those places. They were Our Lady of Lourdes confirmation students going there. So they did get to experience that now. Now we're doing it just in the family service because of COVID restrictions. So unfortunately, the last 3 kids have lost this. But it brought them into the community.
Yeah.
As
I used to feel like confirmation prep was sort of a time where our kids changed from just being a bunch of selfish kids into all of a sudden becoming members of the community. That's how.
Can you talk about what solidarity means?
Well, yeah, I was just going to get into that. So I think if you read this 12th duty, and you ask yourself, what is the enemy that we're fighting against in this duty? I think it's individualism. It's just like a selfish, individualistic life. And so, if you think about solidarity and communal responsibilities, it's like circles that expand, right? The first circle is your own family. It's mom and dad, your brothers and sisters. You have this solidarity that's recognized by your family name, your family life. You're part of a family. You share in the duties of the household. You share in the work of the family. You're not just this selfish individual animal seeking your own adventure in life. You're part of a family. And then that expands from the nuclear family, mom, dad, and your siblings. It expands to grandma, grandpa, uncle, aunt, cousin. It expands to your extended family and your obligations and duties to your extended family. And then it goes to your neighbors and people in your community, the people who live, around you, outside of your home, your neighbors. And then it goes further, it goes to government and political life, and it goes to the church and the parish and your responsibilities in the parish, kids serving at the altar, kids helping out as volunteers at church, all these different opportunities. And you just see how those circles just continue to expand and expand.
Yeah.
And we learn that it's not just us seeking our own individual life, our own achievements, our own awards, our own, whatever. It's us understanding that we're part of a community and learning, like this duty says, to initiate our children, to initiate them. No, it doesn't say to make them
Yeah.
unselfish politicians and community servants, and it doesn't say it says to initiate them.
So we're just beginning this role, getting their feet wet.
Even
when they're
helping them
supposed
to
be-
understand what the needs are,
Right.
what the options even are, and introducing them to them. Like, for example, like bringing the kids to the homeless shelter, because the kids might not even know a homeless shelter exists,
Mhm.
or how you help at a homeless shelter. If you want to help the poor, how do you even, like Jesus says, give alms? And I know most Christians would say, how do I even do that?
Yeah.
How do I give alms? To show the children and say, like, look, we're going to go and I'm going to show you how to give alms.
Mhm.
I'm going to show you a few different ways to give alms, to initiate them. Let's go visit grandma. Let's go visit, Miss Betty down the road, who's a widow, and make sure she's okay. Make sure she's got someone to cut her grass or whatever.
Mhm.
Just even making them conscious of the needs and of the opportunities to help other people. We
Yeah.
have to learn those things.
Mhm.
They're not self-evident. We don't know how to help people. I know I struggled with this as a new Christian. I didn't even know what to do. How do you even help people? What does it even mean, to give alms or something like that? So
Yeah.
to initiate them, and the key word there is initiate, to initiate them into solidarity, becoming part of a group. And there are different groups we're parts of. Man is a social animal.
Mhm.
Learning to identify and understand our different roles in different groups and our communal responsibilities.
Right.
That we have obligations to these different circles, because we receive benefits from these different circles, and those benefits lay upon us certain obligations and responsibilities. So initiating the children into those things. And I know that many Christians, especially converts, the parents don't know how to do those things.
Right.
So that's a challenge for parents, is to even learn how to be initiated themselves, and then to initiate their children.
Well, it's kind of like you need to see what's going on in the parish.
Mhm.
Check the bulletin, talk to people, see what kind of thing that might not all be announced. Like in our church, the homeless shelter isn't even announced, and nobody even knows that we do it. You have to get involved and get to know people, and then you hear, oh, we need some help with this,
Yeah.
because you're involved. They ask.
And that shows you the importance of the parish. And we're going to talk about this later, but it shows you the importance of the parish, because in the parish, there are people doing all these things.
Right.
And when you get into parish life, when you get involved in parish life, you start to get to know those people. And like you said, they say, hey, can you come give me a hand? Because I go to the nursing home on Sunday afternoons. And you don't even know people are doing these things.
No.
But you learn and you get involved, and then once you get involved, now you understand how to do it. And you can say, hey, kids, come with me.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go visit the homeless shelter, the nursing home, the whatever. And that's initiating the children into this work of solidarity and communal responsibilities.
Right.
Okay. Number 13, parents are to teach their children to avoid the compromising and degrading influences which threaten human societies. Parents are to teach their children to avoid the compromising and degrading influences which threaten human societies. So we just got done talking about solidarity and communal responsibilities. And we just got done talking about that. Now we move to this next duty. We're to teach our children to avoid the influences which threaten that very society that we're trying to build up.
So this is things that would make kids just be individuals, make kids be selfish and individualistic.
Arrogant, selfish,
Yeah.
prideful, right? I mean, think about like entertainment that like mocks the weak or mocks the poor,
Well, different things that keep them in. I mean, teenager. It is hard with teenagers and with kids as they start getting a little older, as they want to be alone and do. They have this tendency to just want to lock themselves in their room, and it's, like those kind of things, like that's not good for our society, for you to just withdraw and be alone for no reason. It just, so.
And so and again, we have to ask ourselves, what are these influences?
Right.
And an easy way to go about that, it's something we have to study and pay attention to. What's easy about it is we can just look for the effects. We can just look and see, like, what is it that influences the kids in such a way that makes them more individualistic, or makes them annoyed or frustrated or irritated,
Yeah.
One of the big things I think is like, talk about friends. When you see that the idea that the kids have of friends is like this social, selfish, materialistic, going back to the things we said they're supposed to learn to subordinate, material and instinctual dimensions of their character. You see, these so-called friendships are actually based on those things.
Right.
And then they don't want to talk about their uncle who's poor because he's embarrassing. They're embarrassed by the people that they're supposed to be helping, and thinking about, they're not learning to be merciful. They're not learning to be generous. They're not learning to see problems and solve them. They're actually, embarrassed and trying to avoid those people because their friends don't think it's. And you see, those sort of influences. You see things like alcohol and drugs, obviously, destructive, degrading influences. You see entertainment, just like the self-absorbed entertainment.
Yeah.
Just like turning kids away from society, just driving them into isolation. Those are compromising and degrading influences that threaten human society. And then more serious things like abortion and drug use. Obviously abortion is like this on steroids, like degrading influence that threatens human society. It destroys the very core of human society, which is, nuclear family life. So looking for the effects and tracing those effects to the causes, understanding what the influences actually are. And I think we err in this a lot. I think we demonize a lot of things that actually don't have this effect, and we allow a lot of things that do have this effect.
Yeah.
Because they seem innocent, because they're not stigmatized or whatever. Just like watching movies, just getting this lazy, passive, selfish, critical attitude about things. Talking about, oh, I didn't like that actor, didn't like that movie. Just getting this idea that you're the judge of other people's performances,
Right.
and you're not actually responsible to be solving the problems and fixing the problems. I think there are a lot of things that parents allow because they're not stigmatized. Parents don't get offended by them, and parents do get offended by things that other people stigmatize that really aren't that big of a deal. So anyway, parents are to teach their children to avoid the compromising and degrading influences which threaten human societies. Number 14, parents are to evangelize their children. Parents are to evangelize their children. And this is something I talk about all the time, because if I were to ask Catholic parents, what evangelize means is to preach the gospel. If I were to ask Catholic parents, what is the gospel? Parents very often don't know the answer to that question. They can't tell you what the gospel even is. And so how can you possibly evangelize your children if you don't know what the gospel is? And so again, this is putting the burden back on parents. That parents have to study, because there's an objective content knowledge that's necessary to be a parent. And we've already talked about a number of different issues. One of these issues is parents have to know what the gospel is.
Yeah, I feel like it's like duty of parents to God almost. This is you really see that this is putting parents and God together, and then the children after that. Like, we have to first learn what the gospel is and learn how to express it to everybody. Our children are one of those people, but we need to be able to form a clear idea in our
And it's very simple, because if you just look in the scriptures, you have 4 gospels. The gospel according to Matthew, the gospel according to Mark, the gospel according to Luke, the gospel according to John. And what are they? What are they?
Accounts
They're,
of the Christ, of
they're
Jesus'
accounts
life.
of the life of Christ. It's the history of salvation. It's our children are to be taught salvation history in such a way that leads them to understand the answer to the question, what must I do to be saved? Our children, after we've evangelized them, if someone were to ask our children, what do you need to do to be saved? Our children should know the answer to that question. And it comes through, obviously, the church provides us with resources for this through catechism. Catechism, the Baltimore Catechism answers this question explicitly. What must we do to save our souls? It's explicitly taught in the catechism. The kids memorize the answer. And you see, the church helps us with that systematic evangelization, but in a broader, more natural sense, it's simply constantly talking about salvation history, the life of Christ. You see how the rosary fits into that, meditating on the mysteries of salvation history in the life of Christ and the Virgin Mary. You see how the church provides for all this. But again, if you ask someone, what is the gospel? Many parents won't have an answer for that. And it's our objective duty to evangelize our children. We have to not only know the gospel, but we have to know how to communicate the gospel and to do it effectively. Parents are to evangelize their children. Number 15, parents are to initiate, again, the key word is initiate. Parents are to initiate their children at an early age into the mysteries of the faith. Parents are to initiate their children at an early age into the mysteries of the faith.
Right, obviously, so this means we're going to have our children baptized as soon as we can.
And notice the key word, initiate.
Right.
What's wrong with baptism? Nothing if you understand that it's just an initiation.
Right.
You see? We're not, you can't say, well, what are you saying? Your children are saved? Our children are initiated into the mysteries of the faith.
Yes.
Beginning at baptism. It's an initiation. We're not saying anything is finished. They have their whole lives to live. But as parents, we're responsible for the initiation. We're to initiate our children at an early age into the mysteries of the faith. And there's a natural schedule for doing this in the church. Baptism at birth, and then they go until they're 7 or 8 years old when they start to come to the age of reason, and we're supposed to prepare them for First Communion and First Confession, and the church provides us all the resources to do this. And most families do this. Most Catholic families do initiate their children into the mysteries of the faith, and then to continue through confirmation, which I would argue is sort of the end of parenting, to lead children to confirmation. But again, the key word is initiate, to initiate the children into the mysteries of the faith, to introduce them to them and get them started in the sacramental life of the church. And mysteries of the faith, I substituted sacraments for mysteries of the faith because that's what sacraments are, but it also includes like the rosary, like we just said. Introducing them to the rosary is an initiation into the mysteries of the faith.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, so it's all of that, right? It's initiating them into the devotional life of the church, both in the sacraments and in the devotions that the church gives us. Number 16, parents are to associate their children from their tenderest years with the life of the church. Parents are to associate their children from their tenderest years with the life of the church. What do you think it means by tenderest years?
With their tenderest years, I would think this is the times when they're the most formed. When they're easily formed, little children up through, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, all of those ages. But I was wondering, what's the life of the church? What is this? I'm saying church calendar. What are we thinking?
Well, I think the first thing is we're to associate our children from their tenderest years, their most docile, their most easily influenced years, with the life of the church, which is life of the parish community, of all of the life of the church. So It would mean immersing them into the prayer of the church. It would be immersing them into the social life of the church, into the sacramental life of the church.
Just becoming like making the church your family as far
Yeah.
as this is.
And again, it ties back to that other, number 12, initiating the children into solidarity and communal responsibilities, initiating them into the life of the church. We're not
Yes,
individuals.
Right.
You know, we're not just in this world to get out of it what we want. We're part of communities.
So it can be things like altar serving, you know, from when they're, as soon as they receive First Communion, they can become altar servers, that kind of just helping out in the church and becoming involved.
And having our children identify as Catholics. That's who they are. That's their identity. They can't think of a day when they weren't Catholics. They've been associated with the life of the church from their tenderest years.
Right.
Yeah, so that's duty number 16. Duty 17, parents are to provide a wholesome family life that can foster interior dispositions that are a genuine preparation and support for a living faith. That's a lot of information. Parents are to provide a wholesome family life. Again, this is something for us. It's got nothing to do with the kids. We're to prepare, we're to provide a wholesome family life, and the life can foster interior dispositions that are a genuine preparation and support for a living faith. And so this goes back up to number 3. Parents are to create a home where tenderness, forgiveness, respect, fidelity, and disinterested service are the rule.
Right.
Creating that wholesome family life. And also, down to 13, parents are to teach their children to avoid compromising and degrading influences which threaten human society. And that allows us down to Rule 17 to provide a wholesome family life that can foster interior dispositions, that can sort of give kids certain dispositions or habits that genuinely prepare them to live the Catholic life as adults. It can't make them. Notice it distinguishes. You cannot make your children faithful Catholics.
But you can prepare them and give them a support.
And that's your duty. It's just like gardening. Like, I can't cause tomatoes to grow, but I can prepare a soil, right? If you just compare this to gardening, I can prepare a wholesome garden bed that can foster all of the interior dispositions in the plant that are a genuine preparation and support for it to fulfill its potential.
Mm-hmm.
I can't cause the fruit to be born.
No.
There's other things that are not in my control. But you see how the preparation of the soil is in my control. And I can put the plant in the best possible position to succeed and fulfill its potential.
Gotcha.
Even though I can't cause that.
Right.
But you see, the fruit is not my duty. And that's what we get wrong as parents. The fruit is not my duty. The preparation, the provision of the wholesome life that can foster those interior dispositions, that's my duty as a parent. That's in my control. My child's free will doesn't affect that duty.
Right. So this is what you let in the house, what you keep out of the house, those influences.
The spirit of the house, the activities of the house, the relationships in the family, all of those things are like healthy soil or like healthy air that the children grow up breathing in and drawing nutrients from, that genuinely prepare them to fulfill their end. Right? Okay, but notice that it keeps the child's free will always at a distance. We're never told to produce the fruits in the children's lives. It's always initiate, prepare, provide. You see that?
Yes.
All right, so let's move on here. 18, parents are to begin their children's education in the faith in their earliest years. Parents are to begin their children's education in the faith in their earliest years, and the church provides for that. We have catechism materials, faith formation materials, everything imaginable to help begin, again, notice, begin their education in the faith in their earliest years. Okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Duty number 19, parents are to teach their children to pray and to discover their vocation as children of God. It doesn't say parents are to make their children pray. It says to teach them to pray, right? Teach them to pray. They're going to have to choose to pray. But it's our duty to teach them to pray, right? And so it's not hard to teach children to pray. Children are perfectly comfortable praying if they're taught to pray. And we do this in faith formation. We teach them to make the sign of the cross. We teach them how to kneel and fold their hands and put themselves in a proper posture for prayer. We teach them the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary, the Glory Be. We teach them to pray. So the church provides for us to fulfill this duty. Parents are to teach their children to pray, not make them pray through adulthood, not make them pray when they're 15 years old, to teach them to pray.
Well, and to discover their vocation as children of God. So you see, we have to also be aware of what vocations there are to help them and guide them to see what the opportunities are and what they could possibly do. So there's more to it than that, because we have to discover first what the opportunities are.
Yeah, and we've seen that a number of times now, like when we're talking about solidarity and communal responsibilities. Sometimes we don't even know what they are.
Right.
We don't even know what the options are. And it's our duty to teach our children what the options are.
Okay.
And also to help them leave as many doors open as possible as they grow up, because kids like the idea of shutting doors. And you see that's foolish. Yeah. So to teach them to pray and teach them to discover their vocation as children of God, to understand what the end of their life is, that the end of their life is to enjoy God forever. That's the end that they were created for, to know God, to love God, to serve Him in this life, and then to enjoy Him, to be happy with Him forever in heaven. And how does that affect what you do in this life? How does that affect what you do? There's religious vocations. Mm-hmm. You can be single, you can be married, you can be in the military, you can be an intellectual, you can be a contemplative, you can be an active religious, you can be a deacon, you can be to know all of the options so that they don't feel like they're put on a priesthood or bust plan for life, which many kids are. Mm-hmm. We see that all the time. But they understand there's an infinite number of ways to serve God, and what the Catechism teaches is that your interest and your aptitude is part of what directs you to your vocation.
That word that you see in there, they use the word discover, as if it's already ordained, it's already there. You just have to uncover it. You have to dig it out and figure out what it is.
Yeah, and that's another subject that we're not going to get into, because it is already sort of wired into you.
Right.
It's not fate. It's not your destiny.
Right.
You can't let those ideas get in, because God leaves you with freedom to choose things.
Right, but He made you with certain abilities and desires and things you're good at, things you're not good at, things you enjoy, things you hate, and then also what you're able to do.
And also, one of the biggest dangers is that kids have to make the biggest decisions of their lives when they're 18, 19, 20 years old. And it's our duty as parents to help them to prepare to make those decisions at that time in their life.
Well, it's just cool as a parent, because you've watched this kid grow up, and you can say to them, honey, you're not, in my experience with you, you're not really good at that thing. I don't see you excelling at that thing, but I do see this in you. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
or it's not God's will.
Right.
Or it's not according to the discipline and instruction of the Lord, or it's not good for your communal responsibilities, or it's selfish, or there's moral objectives in discerning vocations.
Right.
But it also comes down to interest. It also comes down to aptitude. It has to be their free choice, and we're gonna get into that further down. So teaching them to pray, to ask God for grace, teaching them that to fulfill their duty is not in their power.
Mm-hmm.
And God doesn't ask them to do his will in their own power. God actually tells them, commands them to pray.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to ask. They have to learn to ask. We have to teach them to pray. And they have to discover God's will for their life, which is their happiness.
Right.
Okay, that's number 19. Number 20. Parents are to establish the parish as the Eucharistic community and the heart of the liturgical life of their family. This is a big one. Parents are to establish the parish as the Eucharistic community and the heart of the liturgical life of their family. And so notice it says parents are to establish it as such. Because there's a tendency not to do that. There's a tendency to just be a Protestant and just sort of pursue your own private religion, your own devotional life, do things you like,
Right.
do things your way.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get involved in the parish, you're like, oh, I don't like the priest, I don't like the homily, I don't like the music. And that's the individualism, that's the selfishness that we're supposed to be fighting against in those
Gotcha.
other duties.
Okay. Right, and it doesn't matter if you like the parish or not. It's the Eucharistic community. It's the only place where Christ is physically present in the Eucharist in your whole entire community, anywhere around you.
Yep.
So it's teaching the children that and
Yeah,
it's
when you
making
say it's the Eucharistic community, you're saying that it's the community in which Christ himself dwells.
right.
And so you can see how an aversion to that community or a criticism of that community is just irrational because Christ himself is present
Right.
in that community.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I've argued with people about this because I said, let's say there's something in the parish you don't like. The music's bad. I don't like the pastor's personality. Whatever. To avoid that parish, you're saying that those negative things are more significant than the positive presence of Christ in that community. You would think that those negatives in your mind are more significant than the fact that Christ is present in that parish community. And I just don't feel like that. You know, I go into my parish community focused on Christ. And that's what allows me to not be frustrated or upset by the little things, the relatively insignificant things I don't like.
Right.
I just mind my own business. I'm there for Christ's sake, and I'm there to serve the community for Christ's sake. Not for their sake, not because they inspire me, not because they are worthy of.
Right.
I love my parish because Christ is present in my parish.
Right.
It's that simple. And that's what allows us to get along with people, to bear wrongs patiently, to be humble, to be patient, to take the low seat at the table,
Mm-hmm.
like Christ says.
And to mind your own business.
Yeah, mind your own business.
But I like how it says the heart of the liturgical life of the family. So there's more. This is the heart, the core, but there's more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's the Eucharistic community and also the heart, really the center of the liturgical life of our family.
Mm-hmm.
So that gets to like holiday celebrations.
I was just thinking.
You know,
that,
it's
yeah.
Christmas time. What do you do? How do you celebrate the holiday? Well, the parish should really be the heart of your holiday celebration because the holiday is just part of the liturgical life of the church.
Right.
Right? Easter time, Christmas time, Lent, Advent. The heart of the liturgical life of our family should be the parish.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, our holiday celebration, our holiday traditions, those things should be focused.
Right, to make this like secular Christmas celebration where you just focus on Christmas parties and things like that.
Decorating your own house. It's always about decorating your own house,
Right.
having your own party, having
Right.
your own separate thing.
Right, and it's not that the Eucharist community, the parish is going to be the heart of that. of all of those celebrations. That's really helpful.
And you can also see why generosity to the church is a virtue.
Oh yeah, you want the church to be
To donate a
nice as well.
statue, to donate stained glass windows, to
Right.
donate, it's because it's for everybody. It beautifies everyone's liturgical life. And therefore it's an unselfish communal act of generosity, because we make the parish the focus or the heart of our family's liturgical life, of our holiday celebrations, prayers. And again, the liturgical calendar teaches us to do this. Right? It was just All Saints' Day. You have holy days of obligation, where your obligation is not to have a cool party at your house. Your obligation is to celebrate the Mass in the parish community, which is the heart of the liturgical life of your family.
Pretty beautiful, huh?
And but it's our duty to establish it as such.
Right.
And you know that's, Protestantism is just the opposite of that. And there are many Catholics who are just caught up in Protestant ideas, who are moving away from the parish and sort of getting lost in their own black hole of private devotions.
Right, there's no point in being Catholic then.
And you have to think about what the implications are in your children's lives.
Right, okay.
When you do those things, that may be comfortable for you, but what are the effects of that in your children's lives?
Right, okay.
That's what's should be causing us to think twice about that temptation. All right. Number 21. Parents are to be generous and tireless. I know you're going to like this one. Parents are to be generous and tireless in forgiving their children for offenses, quarrels, injustices, and neglect.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about that one?
Well, you think about what Jesus told Peter. Peter says how many times we have to forgive our neighbor. And he says we're to forgive them 70 times 7. Not just 7 times, but unnumbered times. So you see with our kids, especially as they get older, there's so many things that come up, and they have to know that they can come to you at any time, and you will forgive them and you'll take them back again. But it also has to do with, I think, raising your children to understand the sacrament of penance, that any time in their life when they sin, they mess up, they can go back to the church and confess their sins. And it's like they have to feel that with you at home too, that they can
Prodigal
confess their sin.
son.
Yeah, anytime they know that you could come back to you.
And I think an effect of parents not doing this, parents not being generous and tireless, I think this is why kids are depressed and suicidal.
Okay.
It's because of this. Because kids actually, this is our duty as parents. It's our duty to be generous and tireless in these things. Generous and tireless in forgiving. Generous and tireless. Because our kids actually need that. They need it.
Yeah.
They
so
need
you're
it.
also saying, this assumes that you're teaching your children and are modeling asking for forgiveness and confessing your sins. Like we just talked about before, like a parent is to be the one who confesses their faults to their children. So you're modeling that, and then the children start seeing, okay, that I need to also tell my parents I'm sorry, or tell one another I'm sorry, siblings, for these things.
Yeah,
But the thing is, it's too, like you can't keep bringing what's hard is that you can't keep bringing it up. Okay, they do something wrong and offend you. You forgive them. You can't keep bringing it up and reminding them, and you have to be forgiving and quiet about it, and bear wrongs patiently.
Well, and you see, people are willing to be generous, but not endlessly.
Right.
It's always easy to say, okay, this is the last time. This is the last time. And we're always tempted to say, you know what? That's it. I've had it. That's the last straw. But this teaches us that we can't do that.
But what if it says parents are to be generous and tireless in forgiving their children for offenses, quarrels, injustices, and neglect. What if the child is not repentant? What if the child hasn't asked for forgiveness? What do you do in that circumstance?
Well, I think that's going to go, well, that's a complicated question, because just because the child hasn't asked for forgiveness doesn't mean that the child isn't sorry for what he's done. That's two separate things. I can be sorry for what I've done, but because of other things, I can't get over this hump of actually confessing it and that's a different challenge,
Okay.
you know. And there are times where I know that a kid is sorry, but he's embarrassed, he's ashamed, and a lot. And this forgiveness, I'm thinking about it. This forgiveness isn't reactive. It isn't always reactive. I mean, just think about it. Christ came in the world to save us, not because we asked for it,
No.
right? He did it first.
Right.
And we love him because he first loved us. And so we can actually anticipate our children's sorrow for their sins and initiate that reconciliation.
So it's a disposition that we are constantly cultivating.
Constantly reconciling,
right.
constantly seeking to be reconciled, and having our children know that our interest is always reconciliation.
We're never seeking to hold on to wrongs done to us. We're always having a spirit of just letting it go. And
what's the problem? What needs to be done? What do we need to do to fix this? What do we need to do to get back on track? Right. It's always positive. It's always generous and tireless.
The Lord's Prayer,
yep.
As we ask Him to forgive us as we forgive others.
Yeah.
So yet it's constantly reminding ourselves that if we want God to forgive us, we must forgive our children.
Yeah, and have a disposition where we anticipate.
Right. That's
we forgive before they seek forgiveness.
Right.
And like I said, most of the time, like Padre Pio, for example, there are times where Padre Pio would be given knowledge of the people's sins, and he would lead them in reconciliation.
It's wild.
But we can do the same thing,
right,
at a natural level, where I know my son is upset and embarrassed and ashamed, and I can sit there and wait for him to.
Or you can go up and give him a hug and say, "Hey, I love you." And that will probably inspire that child to say, "I'm really sorry."
And that's what the prodigal son's father did.
Right. Well, they're different, and different kids have different characters. We have some of our children who, when they're wrong, they can't go to bed until they say they're sorry. You know, they can't rest. And other kids who will never say they're sorry because they're embarrassed and they're prideful, even though
which is a different sin.
Right. But even though we know they're sorry, by other things we see in their
which
how
is
they
a different
act.
And you see that we have to help them learn to say that they're sorry.
Right. Okay.
And what helps them to learn is knowing that we're anticipating it and ready to forgive.
Right.
You know, and it's generous.
Right.
It's a generous.
That love is coming as soon as they start. You know.
And the prodigal son parable teaches us that because the father embraces the son before the son says a word.
Right. It's true.
So where were we? 21. Parents are to be generous and tireless in forgiving their children for offenses, quarrels, injustices, neglect. That's normal. That's normal family life.
Right.
Normal. Okay. 22. Parents are to express their respect and affection by the care and attention they devote to providing for their physical and spiritual needs. We're to express our respect and affection not by words, not by "I love you" baloney.
Yeah, I should say it's by deeds.
By deeds. Parents are to express their respect for their children and their affection for their children by the care and attention they devote to providing for their physical needs and for their spiritual needs.
It's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, actions, not words. So none of this "I love you" stuff. You know what your children's spiritual needs are? You have to provide for them.
Right.
Your respect and affection, your attention and care to their spiritual needs is how you show your respect and affection.
Right. So we can't be lazy and not work. We have to.
And that's not just spiritual needs, that's also physical needs.
Right.
They're physical needs. And again, we could talk about that for an hour, but
well, also you have to teach them simplicity. There's other things too in
let's
there.
Let's just summarize that with show your children that you respect and love them by what you do. It's about your children. Your children are watching what you do. They experience, they feel what you do to them. Words are cheap, right? Talk is cheap. Okay. 23. Parents are to educate their children in the right use of their reason and freedom. And this is my biggest issue in Christian community and education, is that parents don't want to do this. Parents are to educate their children in the right use of their reason and freedom.
What does this really mean? The right use of their reason.
Well, this goes back to the earlier duty of teaching the children to subordinate their material and instinctual desires, inclinations, and so on to interior and spiritual ones. But this is a matter of free will. Our children ultimately have to learn to do this on their own. They have to learn to do this on their own. Parents don't like this. Parents don't like duty number 23. What parents want to do is they want to lock the kid down. They want to banish all of the enemies, remove all the dangers, put child-proof locks on every door, receptacle covers, lock all the chemicals away. They want a child-proof world for their children to live in.
But isn't that what's needed
No.
when they're little, when they're very little, and then you
Well,
kind of
think
like
about
let
it.
the circle get
Well,
bigger
think-
and bigger and bigger?
Yeah, but think about what you just said is exactly right. The right use of reason. Do little children even have reason? No.
Oh, yeah,
That's why
that's right.
That's why that way of handling children, little children, is reasonable. My 4-year-old will not understand that if he sticks this paperclip in the electrical socket, he can die.
Right.
There's no way for him to understand that. And so I have to put covers on the receptacles. And I can't allow him to even have access to those things because he's not rational. I have to treat him like an animal when he's little. But 7, 8, 9 years old, he comes into reason, and the way that the children are trained and cared for has to change because they have to be taught to use their own reason and subordinate their instincts and desires, subordinate them to reason
Okay.
and higher purposes in life.
So they have this freedom, and they have to subordinate their freedom to the right use of their reason.
And this is what parents don't
So,
want to deal
yeah.
with because this is so difficult
It
and
is.
ugly.
I'd rather just take the computer away than
Right. So
teach them how to use it
right. So
responsibly.
what the goal of parents, the duty of parents, and just think about this. The duty of parents is to educate their children to open that computer, use their reason and freedom rightly. That's the goal. The goal is not to banish the internet. The goal is not to banish their neighbors. The goal is not to banish every worldly relative, to avoid every holiday celebration because Uncle Frank might be there. Not to lock the kid down, to put the kid's clothes on, to button his shirt, to tie his tie, to brush his hair, to brush his teeth, to micromanage his whole life and say, that's a good boy right there. No, that's not a good boy. That's a good 4-year-old. But that kid's not learning to be an 18-year-old. And the parents are neglecting this duty of parenting, which is to educate their children to use their reason and freedom. The parents, by that micromanagement, are refusing to accept duty number 23. Because that duty number 23, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, well, you
It's
see-
no more messing around. And that's where the kids are going to sin,
That's what I was just
and they're
gonna
going to get
say.
into all kinds of trouble, and they're going to have to learn the hard way to make the right choices. And for most of the kids, the only way they're going to learn to make the right choices is by getting hit in the face by the consequences of misusing their freedom.
Right.
And parents have to accept the challenge of that duty. That's, for me, if I was going to pick one that I would say parents that I talk to in education are failing, it's that they refuse to take up that duty, number 23, to educate their children to use reason and freedom rightly, not to be denied freedom, but to actually enter into freedom and make right use of it. Why did God create Adam and Eve in the presence of evil?
Because he wanted them to have their free will. He wanted them to he wanted them to love him and to choose to follow him.
God wants us to choose him freely out of love because we believe he's better than everything else. God doesn't want cheap, fake obedience.
Right.
He doesn't want slaves.
Sometimes that takes time for us to experience the world and see how it's a lie.
Yeah, and as parents, we have to know that that's normal.
Right.
That's normal.
It's hard to allow that, though.
And you hear parents will talk.
Oh, I could just avoid those things if I just lock them down.
Yeah, and parents will say, "Oh, Tommy left the faith. Tommy fell away. Tommy." No, Tommy's a normal human being.
Right.
In the process of learning to use his reason and freedom. Now we have to be careful because there are limits where things get destructive.
Right, they get into drugs or they're speeding or
driving drunk like that.
Yeah.
That can end your life. And so there are limits.
Right.
There are limits.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to learn. It's okay for Tommy to get knocked down, or to get bit by this dog, or to fall off his bike and cut his leg. We have to learn because we have to be prudent. We have to learn as parents where it's okay to let a kid learn the hard way, and where there's a limit where you can't let him learn this lesson the hard way because he'll be dead.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I remember a time when Jonathan was 2 and we had a little cactus in the window, and he always tried to touch it, And then one day he wouldn't listen to me. One day I was walking in the room and I saw him go to touch it, and I just was quiet for a minute, and he touched it. And he had little thorns in his fingers, and we had to use tape to pull it out, and he never touched that
Right,
again.
and just take that illustration and apply it to 1,000 different situations. Parents have to embrace the duty to educate their children, to use right reason, and make use of their freedom rightly. We can't take away freedom.
Right. So sometimes
it's not God's will.
Have to kind of stand back and let the bad thing happen to them, and know that
this is also why these relationships that are talked about in the previous duties, why those relationships are so important. Those relationships are what keep us together even when in their freedom they make bad decisions, because that's normal. Parents are ready to just disown the kid and imagine that everybody's Saint Monica because the kid made a bad decision. No, that use of freedom, that exploring, learning things the hard way, learning how to handle freedom, learning that the parents' warnings, God's warnings, are actually real. Right. It's not just artificial. It's actually true. And if you do these things, you're going to suffer for it. And you don't believe that. And so you want to test it. And then they finally test it and they get smacked in the face by it, and they realize that stove is hot.
Mm-hmm.
That party, that's dangerous stuff. That dating relationship, that hurt.
Yeah, so it takes a lot of wisdom to know how far to let them go and be watching over them, and you have to.
I think that right there, that issue of freedom, that I think takes parents down.
Yeah,
I think that they're overcome by it.
When I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about the Psalm where David says, "Remember not the sins of my youth." Mm-hmm. So you have King David, who had freedom, and obviously he sinned as a young person,
mm-hmm.
So you see that's normal.
Well, just look, the whole context of religion, the whole context of Christianity, the whole context of this family life, there's one virtue that characterizes all. It's forgiveness.
Yeah.
This idea that we're all supposed to live without sin and be shocked and ashamed and angry when people sin, that's contrary to the whole teaching of the Christian faith. Sin is normal.
Mhm.
The question is, how do you deal with sin? How do you learn? How do you learn freely to turn away from sin? That's the goal. The goal is to lead our children to not want to sin.
Well, and
If
I
they're
see number 21 where that says parents are to be generous and tireless in forgiving the children. I mean, if you are that, you are leading you're going to have children who are going to love you.
Mhm.
And it's just like how we keep going back to God because we know that He loves us.
Right, you go to confession because you know this isn't like a test. I don't go to confession uncertain, like to talk to the Wizard of Oz,
No, no,
trembling and
right.
shaking, and
No, you know you're going to be forgiven.
it's just a matter of and it's always positive.
Right.
There's always an expectation of a positive response. And when the children have that, they can sort of test the world in their freedom. And even if they do start to get into trouble, they can call for help.
Okay.
And that's why when parents are not forgiving, and when they're not generous, and they're not positive, the children don't feel like they can call for help. And so then you have the prodigal son who kills himself rather than goes home.
Mm-hmm.
And that's serious. That's like no-nonsense parenting. What we see going on, we see homeschool kids killing themselves.
Yeah.
Christian homeschool kids killing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why. Because they're in a state of despair. And it's common. So anyway, 23, I could devote the rest of my life to talking about 23. And that's where other parents and I disagree the most. I think the desire to lock the kids down, shelter them like 5-year-olds, not understand that bad decisions and sins and mistakes are normal for growing kids, that causes parents to restrict their lives and cuts them off from all kinds of opportunities and resources available to them, and doesn't allow them to learn what all their opportunities, what all their vocational opportunities are.
Right.
And it goes back to those other duties. That is sort of the beginning of a bunch of problems, when the parents don't accept that challenge of raising kids to make right use of their freedom and learn how to reason, learn how to make good judgments, and to understand why they need to make good judgments freely.
Yeah.
Okay. 24. Parents are to choose a school for their children which corresponds to their own convictions. Parents are to choose a school which corresponds to their own convictions. This is important because the parents can't feel guilty about choosing a school according to their convictions.
Because we're told to. Yeah.
Right. We hear kids saying, "Well, Tommy doesn't like this, and Melissa didn't like that. No. That's not how education is supposed to work. Parents are to choose schools that will help. I'm sorry, I'm at the wrong one. Parents are to choose a school for their children which corresponds to their own convictions. And in our society, that includes homeschooling. Right. So if you look at the schools in your area, and there are no schools in your area that correspond to your convictions, homeschooling is an option. And it's a legitimate, real option for education.
Yeah.
And it may be part of your duty as a parent to choose a school which corresponds to your own convictions. You may have to homeschool because there's no school where you live that teaches according to your convictions. Or you may have to move your family to a place where there is a school. That's a duty of parents, to choose a school for their children which corresponds to their convictions.
Right.
That's a duty.
Mm-hmm.
That's not just an option.
Mm-hmm.
That's a duty. 25. Parents are to choose schools that will best help them in their task as Christian educators. And so when we look at that duty, we see that you can't just push the kid onto the bus in the morning and say, "There, we took care of education. We paid the tuition bill. We dropped the kid off." No, that's not what a school is. That's not what a school is. The school is to be understood by parents as an institution that helps them in their task,
Mm-hmm.
helps them in their task. It's their duty. The school helps them in their task as Christian educators. And if the school doesn't help, that's the parents' problem. That's not the school's, that's the parents' problem.
Right.
Because the duty to educate the children
Is actually the parents.
is the parents' duty.
Primarily, yeah.
They're your children,
Right.
not the school's job. Parents are to choose schools that will best help them in their task as Christian educators. 26. Parents are to respect the rights of their children when they become adults to choose their profession and state of life. Parents are to respect the rights of their children. This is where this whole life comes to its end. When the children finally establish their own adult lives.
Right.
All of these duties of parents lead to this point. And parents now, at this point, it's too late to fight. It's too late. At this point, when children have the right to make their own adult decisions, parents are to respect the rights of their children when they become adults to choose their profession and their state of life. Parents cannot force the children. Parents can't put their kids on a one-way path and leave them unprovided for if they don't choose the parents' chosen path, which is common in Catholic circles. When children come to adulthood, when they start to make decisions about how they're going to live independently, parents have to respect the rights of their children to choose their own profession and to choose their state of life. If they want to get married and the parent wants them to be a priest, that's none of the parent's business.
Right.
If the parent has dreamed of raising kids to be religious, but Amanda wants to get married, that's none of the parent's business. Parents have to respect the rights of their children when they become adults to choose their profession and state of life. And what happens if they don't is the family breaks apart. Because the kids, they know they have the right to make that decision. And they'll simply say, look, Mom, look, Dad, you're not going to tell me what to do. And so it'll just be a separation.
Right.
That's going to be the consequence if the parents don't respect the rights of the kids to make their own adult decisions.
Right.
And so the goal as parents would not to have that separation, would be not to have that separation, but to keep the family together. And the way the family is going to be kept together so the parents can continue to have good influence is by respecting the rights of the children when they make those decisions. So that's duty 26, to respect going back to the very first duty, to understand that they're children of God. They're not ours. It's not our possession.
Right. And we also, number 19 was we are to teach our children to pray and to discover the vocation as children of God. So this is something we've already been working through with them.
Yep.
So it shouldn't surprise us.
Yeah,
when
it
they make
shouldn't
this
surprise us.
decision.
And if our relationships are right, we should be talking about these things. The kids should be comfortable talking about these things. We should have time to go back and forth with pros and cons. The kids should be able to present it. It shouldn't be this sudden, shocking thing.
Right.
And we're to respect the rights and understand that that's not our business.
Mm-hmm.
It's not our business. It's not our job. That's between these kids and God. They're adults now. The choices that they make in their freedom are their choices. It's their adult life. It's between them and God. That's not our business as parents. And for us as parents, there's some freedom in that.
Yeah.
That's not my business. And then lastly, duty 27, parents are to be careful not to exert pressure on their children in the choice of a profession or in that of a spouse. Parents are to be careful not to exert pressure on their children, either in the choice of a profession or in the choice of a spouse. And this means it's not cute It's not cute for mom to say, "Oh, I'm just a mother. That's just what mother." No, no, no. That's not what mothers do.
Mm-hmm.
That's what disobedient mothers do.
Mm-hmm.
Parents are to be careful not to exert pressure on their children, and that could be negative too. It could be silent. It could be dad just refusing to talk to the kid. Right?
Yeah.
To put a silent pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Parents are not to exert pressure on their children, either in the choice of a profession or in that of a spouse. And one of the reasons for this is because we honestly don't know God's will.
Right. We say exert pressure, but obviously you're going to give like wise counsel, like this girl is not a good girl.
Well, what
for
do
you,
we do
or,
with our kids? We say, look, this is what I think. And when I give our adult kids my advice, I do it with freedom. I'm going to tell you what I think you should do, and I'm going to leave you to do whatever you choose to do. Because whatever you choose to do is between you and God, and you're going to pay the price of it. You're going to pay for it. This is your adult life. This is your adult decision. I'm going to tell you very clearly what I think you should do, what I would like you to do. But I'm going to put no pressure, and I'm going to leave you free to make the decision because you're going to have to deal with it. And I made decisions in my life where I didn't listen to people who gave me their advice, and it was right for me not to listen. And I have to respect my kids to realize that I may be wrong in discerning what they should do, just as adults in my life were wrong in trying to tell me what I should do. I don't know what God's will is for these kids. God may lead them through this broken, wacky road to the best life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's none of my business because like the providence of God does not have to fit within my brain. And I don't know. And it's not my business.
Mm-hmm.
I'm allowed to give my advice,
Mm-hmm.
but not exert pressure.
Makes sense.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the 27th duty. So parents are to be careful not to exert pressure on their children, either in the choice of a profession or in that of a spouse. So 27 duties of parents. It's an hour and 42 minutes
Mm-hmm.
into this talk, and we just touched on them. But you can see that we can go for entire sessions on each of these duties, and maybe we need to. But these are the duties of parents. And the reason why I want to talk about this and emphasize this is because when parents go beyond their duty, when parents try to reach beyond their duties, when parents set expectations beyond their duties, they make themselves miserable and they ruin their families. When parents try to reach beyond their duties and control things that are not in their control, or when parents are anxious and worried about things that they are not responsible for, it doesn't help them. It makes their family life and their parenting worse. It leads them into terrible decisions, it ruins relationships, and it has the opposite effect that they think it's going to have. And we have to learn to study the duties of parents taught to us by the church and just do our job. Just mind our own business, stay in our lane, and understand that these kids are ours for a time.
Mm-hmm.
And we have duties, objective, measurable duties to fulfill in their lives. And then ultimately, they're going to live their own adult life that's between them and their Creator.
Right.
And it's much bigger than us. And we only play a role in that life. We play a part of that life. And our goal is to fulfill these duties, because if we fulfill these duties, we'll put ourselves in the best position to have a great relationship with our kids for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And that's what should motivate us. What should motivate us is because this puts us in position to have lasting, loving relationships with our kids for their whole lives. And we've been blessed to enjoy that with our adult kids.
Yeah.
Even though they've done things that we don't agree with, we still have intimate relationships with them. We love each other. We're always in touch with each other. We're always communicating. And that's what these duties are supposed to produce, that
Right.
relationship, because we don't know what the end is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily going to be negative just because it's not what we like. And we entrust that to God and just mind our own business and focus on our duties as parents.
Right.
And that protects us from making mistakes that could ruin those relationships and bring about the very problems that we say we're trying to avoid. We could be the causes by simply not sticking to our duties. So those are the 27 duties of Catholic parents that I drew out of the Catechism. Again, it was paragraphs 2221 to 2231. And you can print a copy of a document with these 27 duties on it. And what I recommend is just to sit down as parents, as a husband and wife, and just go through these duties and talk about them and ask, are we doing this? Are we doing this? Where are we failing? What duties are we neglecting? And just fix it. Just fix it. Remember, one of the most important things you can do as a parent is to admit your failures to your children. Well, this gives you an opportunity to do that. And so if something is wrong, if there are duties that you're not fulfilling, just fix it. Confess it to your children and fix it.
Yeah.
It's very simple. Forgiveness is the core of the Christian life. Just fix it and everything will be fine. Focus on your duties. Don't set your expectations beyond things that are in your control. Don't try to control things that are not meant for you to control. Just do your job, and you'll see the wisdom of the church and the wisdom of God in teaching us how to be faithful Catholic parents. I hope that's helpful. God bless.